Okay, so let's move on to book 4 of Plato's Republic. I'm delighted to say that finally we get an answer to Glaucon's challenge back in book 2. Yeah, at the end of book 2, Glaucon explained to Socrates that they wanted to see how justice was good in itself. You might remember that Glaucon gave the example of a just man who everybody thought was unjust, and an unjust man who everybody thought was just. And he said, I want you to prove to me that the just man, who everybody thinks is unjust, is happier than the unjust man, who everyone thinks is just. And he gives this example because he thinks that most people will look at that example and say, well, obviously the unjust man, who everybody thinks is just, is happier. Yeah, but he wants to see, how is justice good in itself? How is justice its own reward? Let's put it like that. How on earth is justice its own reward? Because Glaucon believes that the common man would suggest that justice is not its own reward, and we are just because of other benefits and rewards that come later. Yeah, and we get an answer to this question, and actually Socrates has been answering it all the way through book 3 and book 4, and he's been answering it with a political metaphor. Yeah, with this metaphor of the ideal state, which you might call the Republic. Yeah, and I think this is why the book is called the Republic. And so throughout books 3 and 4, we've had this Republic, this ideal state, described to us because the state is a metaphor for the individual, for the human soul, and we shall see that. So this is where we really get to the climax, you might say. And notice it's in book 4 because he talks about 4 cardinal virtues, and he also talks about look at these 4 cardinal virtues. Wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice is number 4. And so I think that but perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, this is why it's in book 4 that we get the answer to Glaucon's challenge. And so you remember at the end of book 3 that Socrates was explaining how these guardians, firstly, how they're educated. Secondly, you might say how they're indoctrinated, simply because there will be a lot of censorship in the education of the guardians and other people in the ideal state. And Socrates explained that these guardians would not be allowed private property, they would not be allowed to trade with gold and silver, so they wouldn't be allowed any money, any wealth. And so Adimantus asks, hang on, Socrates, aren't we making our citizens miserable? Yeah, aren't these just people, these people living in a just society, haven't they become miserable? And wasn't this really the point that Socrates was trying to show them, how justice is its own reward? Yeah, how justice is a benefit in itself. So Adimantus asks the question that maybe you've been thinking also of, where is happiness here? Who would want to be a guardian if there's no private property, no wealth? You're being made one of the poorest members of society, simply because you're doing your job, and you have to do your job. You won't be allowed, or you'll do your job badly if you are allowed to have private property and to have wealth. And so Socrates explains our aim is not the disproportionate happiness of just the guardians, while the auxiliaries and the commoners are miserable. No. Our goal is the happiness of the whole state. So not disproportionate happiness of one part, but a general happiness, a greater happiness that's spread over the whole state. So there's this idea of the whole, and not,